Hey everybody, welcome to a Pitch Jam interview. I've got Michael Martin here from places such as IGN and Red Bull eSports. Michael, how are you today, man?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. We're, of course, before we recorded this, we were talking about our projects. And Michael, I'm always excited to hear what you've got going on because whenever I hear some of the established industry pros talk about like telling kids, how do I get into this, they nearly all of them say something along the lines of if you've got esports beat down, then you're perfectly good to go. And I think that you've been kind of one of those rising stars in terms of esports coverage, at least as far as Red Bull is concerned. But yeah, man, tell me what you're up to lately in terms of writing.
Well, I guess I should start with it's only been, I think, not even maybe a month or so, but I recently left my full-time job so that I could go full-time freelance. And that's been quite an interesting sort of eye-opening experience. Not so much because I don't think the only thing that's really changed is I'm doing more work, which is obvious, but I'm enjoying it immensely. So having said that, I do more news daily at IGN, which I'm really happy about. And then on the point of what you just mentioned, as far as esports goes, I'm not necessarily doing, I think, more work for Red Bull because I still cover tournaments usually over live streams. Just this past weekend, I covered 3 tournaments in one weekend, and that was a little insane. All 3 in different time zones: Malaysia, the UK, and Dallas, Texas. So I did that, and then of course I do weekly player or personality profiles in Street Fighter because at Red Bull I am sort of the Street Fighter beat. I cover only Street Fighter. So I've been doing a lot of work with them. I went to Evo last month. So they flew me out there. It was an amazing experience that I got to cover that and meet and talk to a lot of people that also kind of were within the fighting game community that were really happy with the work that I'm doing, and that was pretty gratifying. Getting paid's great, but hearing people who are both, excited about what you're doing, but also sort of a fan of what you do is a little surreal.
Right, I think because I see a lot of some of the people you cover, in fact, retweeting the stories out that and a lot of these people, I imagine, are kind of rising stars in themselves on the fighting game scene, maybe not necessarily getting the coverage they deserve. So I also thought that that was kind of an interesting and really kind of smart move on your part, is finding all these, not necessarily lower tier, but maybe just lesser known champions of the game and kind of capitalizing on their audiences that are desperate for cool content about them, right?
The interesting thing is it's not just people who are sort of newer to the scene or like rising stars. I've covered, as an example, Knuckle Dew, who is a probably considered one of the best American players right now in Street Fighter. That's interesting because he is a younger player. He is what I guess we would consider a rising star in that this year I've really seen his game mature just in the 6 months or so that I've been covering Street Fighter. But I've also spoken with people who are, I guess you would consider legends within the scene. And a lot of the people that you see retweeting, there's a lot of players and whatnot, but also I'm really trying to reach out to the people who have sort of a larger investment or a voice within the community, because they're the ones who can really push that content out to more eyeballs. So obviously there's a strategy there for me, but as well, they love seeing that content because it's something that I think has been lacking. And that's especially the case in Japan, where our content for Red Bull Esports is localized in Japan, and their fan base and readership is apparently really just eating up the content because their media scene, I guess, isn't quite as strong. And so they don't get to see, I guess a lot of content like that, and it's really interesting to hear that. So it's a little bit of both. I mean, there's some, yes, there's younger players or sort of rising stars who benefit from the coverage and help share that, but as well the just the industry as a whole or the community as a whole benefits. So you see a lot of people sort of I try to get it in front of as many eyeballs as I can.
So tell me a bit about. I know like every up and coming freelance writer kind of has a fairly interesting, unique story in terms of how they got into writing for game stuff. So there is obviously no manual for how to do it. But tell me a bit about how you got into it, how you kind of and what kind of lessons you might have learned along the way that really stuck as like, oh, in retrospect, that was a really good thing I did there and really helped push me along further than if I hadn't done it.
You know, I guess to keep the whole story somewhat short. Basically, I, like many people, started my own website or voluntarily wrote for other websites. And I did that for probably a couple years, or some form of that for a couple years. I got to the point where I decided I no longer wanted to write for free. I felt like I had sort of, you know, paid my dues in a sense, and I was ready to start getting paid to write. A lot of things sort of happened at the same time that helped me make that decision. One, Nathan Meunier put out that book, Up, Up, Down, Down, Left, Right, which was eye opening because there really wasn't a lot of material out there to explain to anyone how to freelance in games writing. Um, and I think within the span of a few months, Good Games Writing's first pitch jam also occurred. And I took part in that partly because I had read Nathan's book and was learning to pitch. So I participated in Pitch Jam. I want to say I did two pitches. I know I got critique from two different freelancers, um, long, more seasoned freelancers, but also the whole event was helpful for me because they set up IRC chats and chat rooms and whatnot. That this was actually my first interaction with real live writers and editors who are doing this for a living. So people like Mitch Dyer and Susan Arndt were talking about answering questions and talking about things that giving advice to people on how to do this deal. So I went through that process. I can't, to be honest with you, I can't remember if the pitch that I landed my first story with, if I used that in Pitch Jam. I want to say I did, but I don't remember exactly. But at any rate, um, in 2014, so the spring of 2014, I sent out my first pitch, and I heard nothing. I heard, yeah, I actually even had interest from IGN, and if it wasn't for timing, as in the story had the time frame on the story had sort of like passed, that I probably would have actually landed it there. And how awesome would that have been to say my first writing gig was at IGN? Needless to say, it took a few months. I finally landed it at Killscreen, and that turned out to be my EverQuest story. Which, if you just Google like EverQuest and Killscreen, it's like the first one that comes up. It's the ghost towns and metropolises of EverQuest, or something along those lines. Um, that was my first paid writing gig. So that was just over a year ago. It got published in June last year. Since then, I've spent time, pitching features and just sort of trying to find my way as best as I could while working full time and going back to school to get my bachelor's degree full time, as well as, having to spend time with the family and raise young children. That we've had two kids in the time that I went back to school and started freelancing. So kind of skipping forward a little bit, I essentially got in contact with someone at IGN, um, basically made a friend there, and it was through them that I was able to start freelancing with IGN doing news. And I've been doing that for actually almost a year. I think it was right after PAX last year, PAX Prime last year, that I started doing news freelancing for them. And I've been doing that ever since. To the best of my ability, as best as I could, part time. All of this has been part time. I've landed features at different places. I landed a feature at IGN. I've landed features at like Pixelkin and whatnot. But again, jumping forward a little bit more, it got to a point where I felt like I was now missing out on work, or wasn't getting as much work as I felt like I should have. And Red Bull eSports came along earlier this year, and I have been doing a lot of work there. That's the bulk of my work is there in IGN News. And I got to a point where I felt like I was comfortable enough to leave my job, which was working for a community college for the state. I didn't get paid a lot, but I did have some decent benefits, so there was a little bit of security there for full-time freelancing. And since then, like I said, do Red Bull Esports regularly, IGN News every day, and I've had more work go on Pixelkin. I'm trying to think of, I guess, the various places, but yeah, I mean, I've had stuff go up in a lot of different places, and um, it's been wonderful. And the only way I even got to do any of this was I just decided that I wanted to be paid for writing, and I just started pitching.
So would you say that like probably one of the most important lessons you kind of learned along the way is gauging the value of your work and maybe not like sequestering yourself to volunteer sites or something like that?
I am not sure if you've ever seen my opinions on volunteer writing. I have very, I have very strong opinions about it. I don't think it's bad because obviously I did it. I'm also the guy not only that voluntarily wrote, but was running a website asking for volunteers. And looking back, I see where I really don't like how I did things because I feel like there's misrepresentation going on with people running websites, trying to attract writers. So what I always tell people is there's nothing wrong with writing voluntarily, but you need to get something out of it. And if you don't have editors editing you, or if you are just doing it just because you want to have some corner on the web to throw stuff up online, that isn't always necessarily good for you as a writer. You need to be growing and learning in that process. Or if you feel like you've already you know what you need to know, or you have the ability, then there's absolutely no reason for you to write for free. You don't have to. I mean, you don't have to start that way. A lot of people do, but you don't have to start that way. If you're a good writer, you're a good writer. So if you feel like your work is worth getting paid, then go start pitching.
Awesome. So for the freelancers or the hopefuls who are participating in Pitch Jam, other than the basic idea of accurately valuing your work or valuing the volunteer work that you commit to, what other advice would you kind of give to them, even if it's just in the event or outside of it? I'm really curious to see like what are some of the biggest things that have stuck with you in your brief time as a freelancer.
Um, I tell people sort of the same two things all the time. One is just do it. So that kind of just goes along with what I just talked about. If you feel like you're worth getting paid, then just go start pitching articles. Just go do it. But the other part I feel is very important, and it's hard to do. But I would say that it's easier to do now than it ever has been because editors and writers are so accessible. Even other freelance writers make contacts. And if you can, make friends. uh, I, I'm not. I have a lot of friends now in the industry, and my point isn't to say make a friend so that you can use them to get ahead. You still have to work hard. you have to work very hard. But the thing is if you make the contacts and make friends, they notice that, and they're more willing to help you out, with work if if they see that you're working hard and that you're doing good work and it's consistent and you're reliable. So those are the two things that I always tell people: just do it and make friends. But the third thing that I think kind of, and I struggled with this, and I've talked about this a lot with on my on Twitter and everything. I remember when I started, and everyone talked about, and you kind of brought it up too with the esports thing. Everyone talked about find your niche. I'm like, what the hell? Like, I don't know what that means. Like, I know what that means, but like, I don't know how do you do that exactly? And the funny thing is even when I started, like I knew what my niche was. I'm like, I don't there's nothing I know better than fighting games. I've always loved fighting games, but I don't know how to turn that into, my make that uh, my advantage in this field. So the esports thing, like you mentioned, that's a big thing now. It's growing in all areas. Fighting games, MOBAs, of course, just everything. And I was like, I don't know how to get involved with that. I guess by chance, I had started following the tournament scene with Street Fighter more closely in the last year, and then a lot of that has to do with Capcom Cup and Capcom throwing more money into this whole thing, and tournaments becoming a bigger deal. And I've always loved Evo. I've always wanted to go to Evo. So in following that, I remember getting or seeing a tweet from Red Bull esports content manager asking for people that know esports and like the fighting game community, um, but specifically Street Fighter. And I sent an email that said, I started out with, you're probably not going to find very many people that know Street Fighter as well as I do. And I meant that because I've been playing Street Fighter since, way back in the day in the arcades with Street Fighter 2. And I've followed every iteration of it. I've played every iteration of it. And I follow it was despite, like I said, by chance, I've been following the scene. So somehow I turned that into, that is where I get the most work I do. I cover events, usually from home, from live streams, but I've had the fortune of traveling, like I said, to Evo, to Vegas, and I went from not knowing how to, sort of find my niche to for a while, I was almost exclusively writing about fighting games. I was actually becoming a little worried that I was becoming too invested in fighting games and not writing enough other types of content.
I think it's kind of a precarious bridge that you walk when you make claims like that, when you're emailing netters saying like, hey, here's why I'm the best option for you for whatever assignment you want to throw at somebody, or this new story that you yourself had no idea. Because it's absolutely necessary to have that confidence, but you better have something to back it up, at least the very well thought out inkling of an idea for a feature pitch, or for a news lead or something like that. And I think it's interesting that you chose to directly communicate with the Red Bull editor in that way, but you obviously had something to back it up, right?
At that point, I was already writing. I'm not sure if I had earned it yet at that point yet, but I was already sort of becoming IGN's freelance fighting game guru. They have a fighting game guru in Vince Ingenito, who I love to death. He's an amazing person, and but he doesn't. He's an associate editor, or an editor. I can't remember his exact title, but he doesn't do a lot of news stories. So whenever fighting games, Street Fighter, everything that I get to do is all, I consider all luck. Street Fighter 5 announcement back in December got leaked, and that's how I got my first feature at IGN. Between that and Mortal Kombat X, coming out, there was a lot of news for those games, and I was hitting all of those stories because, again, I know fighting games. And so, yeah, I mean, I already had the content built up to back that claim, but as I said, and for a lot of people, they don't realize how old I am. I'm 38 years old, transitioned into this career that people half my age are trying to get into. And I've had to work very hard, and I've worked long nights, and it's don't get me wrong, I love what I do, but it has been very hard work, and you're battling for work with thousands of other people, potentially, especially if you're looking for a full-time gig. There's thousands of people out there that want these jobs, and there are really only a handful that can do it. So somehow you have to make yourself stand out, and usually that's finding your niche.
I think I did really like your point about just the making friends in this industry is basically just as important as building up your content and your skill level, because I know despite being published now on PC Gamer and Playboy, I still have a long road to walk down if I want to get to even half the level of some full-time staffers at some of the publications that I really admire. But it's this weird relationship where like just you and me, we have a running tally of how many favors we owe each other for editing help or looking at a pitch or something like that. And like I consider you a good friend, but it's also it's also this relationship of like we both acknowledge that there is a skill there that is worth investing in each other, because you can come to me or I can come to you, and that the help one of us provides the other will actually result in a better product, as opposed to just like going downstairs and asking the wife or the wife or your dad,
Your favorite aunt.
Aunt Gladys, tell me what you think of my Everybody's Gone to the Rapture preview. It's like, what? Uh, but yeah, no, I think making friends is just as important. It's certainly one of the only things that's helped propel me as far as I've gone. But I think that is good for this episode of the little Pitch Jam panel interviews. Michael, tell the fine folks, tell the fine Pitch Jam participants where they can find your work and Twitter and social media and all that jazz.
One thing that I wish Red Bull would improve on is search functions for stories and or authors. But having said that, Red Bull eSports, actually should probably pull up the address because it's a little bit of a different. So redbull.com/US/EN/esports, or just Google it. I do all the Street Fighter stuff there. So anything Street Fighter related goes up on there. I cover tournaments. I do weekly player personality Street Fighter profiles. IGN news, you can't really, I guess, search by author there either, I guess. But I do IGN news every day, and it's not just gaming related. It's all of their entertainment stuff too. I'm fortunate that I get to kind of do both sides of it. I've had stuff go up on pixelkin.org recently. And IGN previews. I do some previews for IGN as well that I just sort of kind of got into that recently. That's kind of another point that if you want to start doing other work besides maybe if you're doing news or something specific, you just need to start pitching that work as well. So having said all that, the easiest way to find me as well, I will always be spamming out most of my work on Twitter, which you can find me at Bizarro_Mike. That's 1Z, 2Rs.
Awesome. And as always, you can follow Good Games Writing at Good Writing VG, and you can follow me at Joseph Knoop, JOSEPHKNOOP. The K is silent. But please stay tuned for more Pitch Jam updates, and make sure to submit your pitch and your RSVP. That way we can get you some guaranteed professional feedback from some of the best freelancers like Michael here in the business. And stay tuned for more, everybody. Thanks.